People in these villages? Yeah, not the first time.
How come no one remembers that?
Because the Soviet Union never released information about that accident until 15 years afterwards, and it leaked out in the late 70s.
But was it as serious as Chernobyl?
Well, it wasn't as serious in the fact that it was more just leakage from a containment center. It wasn't actually a meltdown, like a chain reaction that got out of control. But the radiation got in the air and poisoned a bunch of people in villages nearby.
Do you know how much it cost the Soviet Union to do what they did for Chernobyl?
18 billion?
9 billion.
9 billion.
Which was a lot of money. A lot of people claim that Chernobyl is what bankrupted the Soviet Union.
Well, it was worse than that, though. I mean,
that was 9 billion immediately.
Beyond that, though, do you know how many people they mobilized into the exclusion zone to try to cover the plant? And they covered the plant within a month. 600,000 people.
Because every person could only spend 30 seconds or something like that.
Yeah. And they also hired those miners who got exposed to thousands of times lethal doses of radiation to dig underneath, because they had originally planned to put liquid nitrogen, a tank of liquid nitrogen underneath the plant should the radiation fall underneath the concrete floor. They ended up not having to actually finish completing it, but they dug the tunnel anyway, and a lot of those miners have died.
Yeah.
And the ones that are left have all sorts of crazy health problems. You know, they're cancer, all sorts of debilitating experiences. Really terrible.
Anyway, you saw I was there firsthand. I was in the town of Pripyat.
Wow.
What are you thinking?
Oh. Our technological systems are so fragile. We're too dependent on them.
So it's like, do you want anything right with your butter?
I think if the economy really goes down, now we have so many nuclear plants. You know, nuclear plant to keep one going so there isn't an accident. I mean, there have been very few accidents, but you know, you have one accident and it's a big problem.
Yeah.
But if there's just a slight drop-off in the ability of these utilities or these governments to marshal enough resources to get people to care about these reactors, I mean, what happens? I mean, what about all the spent fuel that isn't being stored in a Yucca Mountain anywhere? It's on site in all of these plants. It needs to be constantly cooled and contained properly. What if there's no way to do it because the infrastructure declines? You know, like the pumps break down, at all sorts of places.
I don't know.
I don't think anyone knows. I don't think we've... See, Vern, I don't know if you've thought about it, but I've thought about it. I mean, I was tepidly pro-nuclear power. I think you were more pro-nuclear power than I am, but after seeing that Chernobyl stuff, watching those Chernobyl documentaries, that whole day you were there, I was watching Chernobyl documentaries all day that weekend, afterwards at least. And seeing this Fukushima stuff, which is orders of magnitude worse than Chernobyl. I don't think we should be messing with this technology anymore.
So how do we solve the global energy crisis?
We have to walk away from our current economic model. We have to have the cultural and political will and imagination to walk away from centralized fossil and or fissile energy. Fossil and fissile energy need to be consigned to the dustbin of history. And we just don't have the imagination to do it right now. We have to transition to a lower energy, simpler society. This doesn't mean we have zero technology. It just means we don't depend upon these ever-increasingly brittle webs. We can't do it. We can't. Case in point, One thing that happened, there's a bird migration institute based out of California. I can't remember. Anyway, I saw him interviewed last week about Fukushima, and he was talking about what happened to certain bird populations, and the kind of bird populations that ate from the kind of vegetation that quickly absorbed things like radioactive iodine and strontium-90 and stuff like that. That as the Chernobyl radiation cloud spread through different parts of the world, young bird populations experienced huge die-offs when the radiation settled in over certain areas. And when some of the radioactive dust fell into California in 1986, within a couple weeks of the release from the Chernobyl plant, all sorts of bird populations in the Sierra Nevada just collapsed.
From Chernobyl?
Yeah, from the radiation in Chernobyl. Now keep in mind that in Chernobyl you had one reactor and no spent fuel pools, and they released radiation first in the atmosphere for about maybe a month. You have Fukushima, which has been doing this for 6 weeks with 4 reactors and 2 or 3 spent nuclear fuel pools. And it's not only releasing it into the reactor, it's releasing it into the Japanese groundwater and into the Pacific Ocean. And there is, because of the landform and the terrain, there will be no containment building for the Fukushima radiation belt for at least 6 to 8 months. So we have hundreds of, what you did not have in large amounts, you had in some small amounts at Chernobyl with plutonium. Here in Japan you have tons of spent plutonium fuel. Plutonium. I mean, just 1 ton of plutonium, just 1 ton, releasing all that stuff in the air, potentially could kill hundreds of millions of people. I mean, there is more stuff being released by Fukushima than were released by all of the tests by the French, the United States, the British, the Israelis, and all of these people that were testing out nuclear weapons throughout the 50s and 60s. What this is a real fucking disaster. Of a kind that we just have not processed this. I mean, this could be one of those black swan, once in a million years events, but it's not so much how often a risk could happen, and that's just a question of people's mathematical modeling of probabilities and assumptions. But it's, if one happens at all, the effects could be just so devastating that it didn't matter that it was the only one. It just only takes one. And this is the one. And I think, based on everything I see, and I've heard from a couple people that think, like the Arnie Gunderson at Fair Winds, and Nicholas Busby at the IAEA, not the IAEA, at some European think tank that studies nuclear safety. I think we have to walk away from nuclear power, and that takes a significant chunk of our ability to solve climate change away. But climate change is a problem, but Fukushima is another problem. We just have to say that highly complex industrial civilization of the kind we are used to now, we have to be able to have the maturity to say that this is an insane system. We have to walk away with it and stop contributing to keeping this monster going. Because either we walk away from it, or we find the Earth in full-scale revolt against us. And that's all I have to say at the moment, without further prepared remarks.